sorry, text chat. I'm missing the text chat. Are there many experimental studies of the relative effectiveness of the formative assessment for learning outcomes? I haven't found a lot of experimental studies. There's certainly a lot of literature, Peter, around it, not always with empirical evidence, but there are quite a few. If you're interested, I could certainly, you could certainly contact me and I can point you in the right direction, or I could provide a list of references to Jeff, who could possibly post it up to the site somewhere. If people are interested, I've got certainly no shortage of literature talking about formative assessment and peer assessment. Susan, beyond the basic outline of what is expected in the first offering, in those earlier offerings prior to using the online peer review system, only insofar as we would give them basic instructions on how they should participate in the peer review process, what was an appropriate kind of feedback, and that it should be constructive. I think but how they interpreted that, I think, was more challenging until we introduced the online peer review system. Because the online peer review system has been designed with that scaffolding in mind, so the I button gives them the option to really see more specific details about each of the criteria, we found that generally the feedback from those students was far more constructive. What we found prior to using that kind of more scaffolded approach was the students, they didn't give inappropriate feedback, but they gave very brief feedback which was not necessarily going to help the student to perform on their work. But if you looked at a couple of the screenshots I put up, well, certainly one of those, they were giving really positive and constructive feedback on that particular criterion. Quite insightful comments. So my experience has been the scaffolded approach has been far more effective than just me giving initial guidelines about what constitutes being constructive as opposed to non-constructive. I think providing a more scaffolded approach can help guide them through that process much more.
Any other comments or questions from people?
Is anyone here using formative feedback or peer review, peer assessment processes? That was Peter? Oh, Susan? Yeah? So how have you found the process, Susan?
I used it for the first time this year in team-based learning. So in the teams that the students form, the peer assessment is part of that whole process. I only did a pilot this year with only 2 weeks of it, so it wasn't really long enough to be able to say a lot from it. But that was one thing that I noticed, that the students really needed a lot of guidance on how to give constructive versus non-constructive feedback. But being in a classroom and face-to-face, I think they were much more likely to make personal comments rather than constructive comments. Whereas when you're assessing work online, it would take away some of that personal comment, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it might be interesting for you to try out this ICT-based approach and just compare your experiences with that. But certainly, I think if you can provide the scaffolding embedded within the system that you use for the students, and you don't need to use necessarily our online peer review system. It's there for you if you wanted to. But I think you could use a similar ICT approach with with a range of technologies. Yeah, well, and I'd be certainly happy to work with you, Susan, to guide you through that. We could even set up a separate site just for that purpose if you want to keep the data separate.
Kelly, did you want to take the mic?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Denise. It's Kelly Martin. Thank you for your presentation. As you know, I contacted you about about the peer assessment tool, hoping or expecting that I might be using it on the project that I'm working on here at Adelaide Uni. But I'm yet to get in there and have a look. I was wondering, when I was thinking about some of the criterion, for example, validation of the code against W3C standards, I mean, that's quite objective, and so it's the kind of thing that really you'd expect students to just say yes or no, it does or it doesn't validate. Maybe provide a comment about whether there's a particular tool or something that the student could have done or maybe missed out in that process. So there would be some criterion that would be easy to assess, and then others where you would expect and hope for some more qualitative feedback. Where in the process can the students provide an overall? You mentioned that sometimes they provided overall feedback, so they would just respond to the multiple choice options. Is that, I didn't see in the screen grabs, the sort of screen that summarised all of the feedback and then provided a text box for an overall evaluation.
Yeah, hi Kelly. Yes, you couldn't see it because it's a very, very long screen, so I just took a portion of the screen. You have, when you set up the review, you have complete control over all of the feedback options that you provide. So you can use the multiple choice, you can use the rating scale, you can use an ordinal scale, you can have purely qualitative boxes if you like, and you can add a qualitative box right at the end, which is what I've had in all my courses, which was why I was able to do that comparison of whether it really did make a difference, whether they made comments step by step or just overall comments. And as you saw from our analysis, in fact, it didn't matter. What mattered most was that they were engaging to the point where they were making qualitative comments to justify the decision that they'd made or the rating that they'd given it. So yeah, you've got complete control over how many feedback boxes you provide, whether they're after each of the criteria, qualitative feedback boxes. You can control whether there's one after each of the criteria or right at the end, or a combination of both. No problem. Thanks for joining us, Susan.
Yeah. Peter, did you want to make any comments?
I think that yes, I have used formative assessment on a couple of units, and generally it works pretty well. So my main motive for coming in here was just collect more ideas for things that I could do, and I think it's been very useful for that.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I mean, I think generally the approach is, certainly the literature would support the approach can be effective. I've just found with the scaffolded approach that it's addressed some of the limitations that I've certainly experienced with the peer review. My major concern, as I pointed out earlier, was really that while students were benefiting from the peer review process in terms of improving their work, they weren't necessarily developing enough confidence in their ability to critique others, which is why I kind of moved to this scaffolded approach, which seems to have worked for me. But yeah, I think it's integral to what teaching and learning ought to be about, after all. Has anyone here tried the negotiated assessment and have any clues about how to engage students more in that process?
Oh, now that's an interesting one.
No. Jeff, have you had much experience with negotiated assessment models?
I know some of our staff here at the University of Adelaide have tried that. It's not particularly widespread, but there are certainly some areas. I think in the law school they have done that. They've done negotiations with the students on that, but I guess that's probably the nature of the discipline as well, that sort of helps with that, I think. But I certainly haven't had any conversations with them about how that works, what are the advantages, disadvantages, what problems they've had. So I noticed, actually I noticed Bobby Elliott's come on board. Bobby, have you got your mic there?
Hi Jeff, yes I do. Sorry for being late.
That's okay. We've just been talking about peer review, and Denise Wood was our speaker, and she's just asked a question about whether anyone's had any experience with basically negotiating with students about their assessment. So I don't know, Denise, whether you want to repeat that or ask that again or say something, and I'm not sure whether Bobby wants to make any comments about that.
Yes, sure, Jeff. Hi, Bobby. I was just saying that in the case study that I worked through for this particular presentation, one of the things I trialled, and this is a first-year group, was David Bowd's approach to negotiated assessment, whereby I put up a wiki of listing the assessment criteria based on what the criteria had been in previous offerings of the course, and I opened it up for students to be able to negotiate the criterion, to change or to suggest changes and to discuss amongst themselves. And what I found was useful was the feedback I got from students who didn't quite get some of the criteria. So in terms of me being able to adjust to be, I guess, more transparent and improving clarity, I think that was worthwhile. But what disappointed me was that really it was a handful of students that engaged in the wiki. So I was just wondering whether anyone else had explored the potential for that particular approach, and if they had they found more effective strategies for engaging students?
That's certainly an interesting approach. I have heard of it before, I think in textbooks rather than in actual practice. So it's interesting to hear someone try it. I suppose I have two immediate reactions. One is validity of assessment. I like the idea of students participating in that process, but is it not possible they could create invalid assessment criteria?
I guess that's why I chose the approach to provide them with the guide, and I guess that might have inhibited some of the freedom of students to feel that they wanted to participate, because, in a sense, the criteria were already up on the wiki, in a sense, and they were just given the option to discuss whether they had any issues with the criteria. They felt I'd missed criteria that were really important, and the weighting. I don't think and I guess for the reasons that you raised, Bobby, I'm not confident in, and certainly this was a first year course, so I don't think it would be appropriate first year anyhow to just go open slather and just say, well, let's sit down and start with tabula rasa. But I was interested to see whether students felt I guess more ownership and more connection with the criteria, if they felt they were able to participate in the weighting and whether other criteria should be there. So I mean, for the ones that did participate, they ended up not actually changing